checks and employment screening solutions. People G2 gives their clients access to the best human capital management and due diligence tools available. They are dedicated to helping their clients with all of their people-related decisions. To learn more, go to www.peopleg2.com. Talent Talk centers on the topics of talent recruitment and management, leadership development, company culture, and employee engagement. These are all timely topics for CEOs, entrepreneurs, HR professionals, and business leaders. We hope that as you tune in to listen each week, whether to the live broadcast or to the podcast on iTunes or iHeartRadio, that you hear something you can take away that will help you grow and impact your career in a positive way. And now, here's the host of the Talent Talk radio show, the founder and CEO of People G2, Chris Dyer.
Good afternoon and welcome to Talent Talk. It's 1 o'clock on a Tuesday, so we are live, and live is important because you can catch us on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, all over the interwebs if you'd like to check us out on video and be able to be a part of the live conversation. But also, if you're not and you want to be on the podcast, we also turn this into that podcast format, and we are all over that. Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Podbean, wherever you find your podcast, you can listen. If you don't want to look at our ugly mugs, if you just want to listen in later on, that's fine too. But really, this show is all about having important conversations around talent, speaking to very talented people about what they're doing, what they're thinking about. And today we thought it'd be interesting just to have on one guest. We sort of have done the two guest thing for many years, and I think we're going to be maybe kind of transitioning a little bit into the one guest at a time format and see how that goes. But I'm excited today to talk to Bill Lyons. He's the founder and executive chairman of Lyons HR Inc. He's also a Forbes book author. The book is We Are HR. Certainly you can, I'm sure, check that out wherever you buy your books online. And, you know, for our conversation today, we really love to have you make sure you subscribe. We have lots of you who get us in all different formats. We've about 10,000 downloads a day, which is a few million a year. Really proud of the audience and the incredible thoughtfulness of questions and comments that you all bring to us every single week. So don't forget, wherever you're tuning in, to let us know what you're thinking about, what your questions are, and anything else that we should be talking about that's on your mind, because that is really important to us. Finally, you can go to TalentTalkRadio.com and listen to all those past shows. But enough of the business. Let me go ahead and bring in Bill to the show. Bill Lyons, again, founder and executive chairman of Lyons HR Inc. Glad to have you here today, sir.
Thank you, Chris. It's good to be with you.
So why don't you tell them a little bit more about you? What's important for us to know about you? Certainly your resume, your upbringing. What's good for the context of our call today for the audience at large to understand about you.
Well, sure. Well, we're on Talent Talk, so we're talking about human resources, and for the last 27 years, I've been operating a company called Lyons HR. We started in 1995, so we're about to start our 28th year in business. Lyons HR is a professional employer organization, or PEO. We are a national company, one of the largest privately held PEOs in the country. And PEOs, what we do is we provide outsourced human resource solutions for small to medium-sized businesses, usually in the areas of payroll tax management, benefits, procurement and administration, safety workers' compensation, and also a whole host of HR compliance issues, both at the federal and at the state level. So for the past 27 plus years, we've been engaged in that business, and we've gotten the opportunity to work with a variety of businesses across a range of industries. And so we've seen just about everything there is to see in the space of HR. And we enjoy helping small companies solve their problems.
Well, I imagine you might have said you had seen it all, and then all of a sudden we all got hit by a pandemic, right? I mean, whenever you maybe in life you think you got it figured out, it throws you a new curveball. And we've been talking a lot on this show about changes in work and remote work and hybrid work. Certainly people's concerns around culture and engagement and having people collaborate and work well together. But maybe from the lens of HR, right? What are some of the things that you're seeing that people are kind of being faced with that's part of this new reality of the pandemic?
Everything that you just mentioned has certainly been affected, and HR is in the middle of every one of those different disciplines. You think about the complexity of being an employer in the year 2022. Never in our history has being an employer been as complex as it is now. When you think about all the things that employers are held responsible for, for years the employer has been the country or the federal government's number one tax collector through payroll withholdings. Okay, so in addition to that, all the laws and regulations that we are tasked with maintaining has been made more complicated as a result of COVID. You think about all the things that came out of the CARES Act with the social distancing and the testing and the mandates. Can employers come back to work? Is it an essential business? Is it not an essential business? And so while we were juggling with all of these questions, we had employees that were calling wanting to know, what are we supposed to do? Well, we're trying to figure that out at the same time. Things were moving at a very, very fast pace. And so, I hate to use the word new normal because it's overused, but the reality is that things have changed and will likely never go back to the way they were before. We're going to be living, I think, with COVID, for the rest of our lifetimes. And so we'll learn how to adapt to these new realities that we're confronted with, not only in the workplace and our personal lives, but of course in the workplace. Workplace safety is obviously a very important thing. Many companies were forced with reconfiguring their office space in order to provide for the social distancing. Many jobs, as you probably know, cannot be done remotely. They do require someone to report to a location and perform a task. And so each of those were affected by the pandemic. And of course, in those type positions that can be done remotely, you think about technology, financial services, insurance, those kind of things. All of those had to adapt very, very quickly in a short period of time to be able to continue to service their clients in a remote way. If you think about I guess how the digital age has come to be in the last 2 years. We probably took 10 years worth of digital advancement and squeezed it into about 6 months worth of time on the calendar, because out of necessity, we had to do that. Just like we're now talking on Zoom. Many people didn't use Zoom before the pandemic, and now video conferencing is as commonplace as picking up the telephone. So HR has been sort of at the forefront of all of these changes that have affected the workplace. So anything that affects the employees and the workplace, human resources is right in the middle of it.
Yeah, and with so many things we've seen, change happen, and there's always growing pains to change. I mean, we can think about, I'm sure, when computers became a regular thing in offices, right? It was great, a lot of productivity, but then we had viruses and we had security issues. People started having their own smart devices. Great, they could do more work, they could access things quickly. But we had security, and it was always this kind of give and take, right? And I think certainly we've seen a lot of good progress with flexible work for those that can have it. Those jobs that people said could never be remote or flexible, and we have found a way to make them because they had to be.
That's right.
I mean, even like bank tellers. No one ever thought a bank teller would be working from home, and yet this has happened, right? So, but we continue to always those give and takes, and I think there's great opportunities for entrepreneurs to maybe solve some of those problems that are happening. But I think one of the questions that I wanted to make sure I asked you is how do you think right now in this sort of present moment, how can HR really be a part of the profitability that's tied, to what you guys are doing, to making sure that companies stay profitable, make sure that we, don't have these unexpected expenses and things that, in the realm of what we can control. Where should we be thinking about that conversation right now?
Human resources historically was sort of viewed as an administrative function and not necessarily strategic. And I think that there's been a change in focus where now human resources is being viewed as a strategic initiative of successful companies. And if it's not, it really should be. You think about the ways that human resources impacts the profitability of a company. Obviously, most people or most companies, their profitability is determined by the productivity of their workforce. So a workforce that is happier, in a more positive culture, that has lower turnover is going to be more profitable. And HR has input in all of those things. When you think about the cost of turnover, SHRM, the Society of Human Resource Management, they estimate that the cost of one turnover can be as much as 6 to 9 months the salary of the person who leaves. So a simple example, a person making 60 grand a year, it might take, $30,000 to $40,000 in cost if that person turns over. And the more specialized the skill, the more the turnover will cost. And we're probably now living through one of the tightest labor markets that we've seen in 40 years. There's over 4 million more job openings today than there are people on unemployment. And so the scramble for talent is really immense right now. And companies are having to get creative as to how they're going about getting their employees. But as long as HR is viewed from a strategic point of view and not just an expense point of view, I'm talking about these are long-term investments that we're making into our HR. Those companies in the long term are going to be more profitable. If the company is looking at their employment as an expense on the P&L and not looking at it as an investment, then they probably have the wrong perspective. And the reason some companies do that is because payback for an HR investment is not very quick. I mean, when you're investing in infrastructure, when you're investing in technology, and when you're investing in process improvement that is going to make a company more productive, those paybacks usually are over a longer term. And so it takes real discipline for a business owner to look at those things through that prism.
I think one of the biggest problems we've seen is that the average size company says, well, that doesn't happen to me. That kind of cost isn't there when I have to replace somebody, or that isn't going to happen to me. I'm not going to have those types of expenses. Big companies know, people who are constantly hiring, they understand this. But I think for the average SMB, they're looking at it and it's sort of like, until it happens, they don't believe it, right? Mm-hmm. And they don't realize what an impact good HR can have to their bottom line, what an impact, making the right hires can have to the profitability. So what advice might you give to someone who is sort of faced with that type of person who doesn't believe that that's going to happen, that's just not their scenario, despite there being huge studies about it, despite I think most of us understanding and knowing that? How does that average person maybe push through to that small business owner that they really do need to think about this in a much more strategic way?
I think the only way that you can do that with a person who's potentially skeptical is to point to other examples, and not necessarily to use scare tactics, but take, for example, an EPL claim, wrongful termination or something of that nature. That can occupy the business owner's time for 6 months to a year if there is a employment-related lawsuit that's related to employment practices. So until that really happens and you experience that, you don't really have an appreciation for it. I can point to another example of where it's happened. One of the things that HR is tasked with is providing the compliance infrastructure for the company so that they don't step out of bounds. And when they do, that they are in a defendable position. And that's some of the value that PEOs bring to their clients, usually smaller clients that don't have a budget for on-staff labor attorneys and people of that nature. But trying to convince somebody of a pain that they've yet to experience can be a challenge. And we run into that all the time.
Yeah, and it is big. And I think maybe one of the other things we have to think about too is, a lot of business owners don't realize what some of the challenges are in having remote employees, right? And what that has maybe created for us to think about. So what are a few of the challenges or a few of the things you think companies need to rethink or identify or to know here as they have remote employees?
Well, the remote environment has created challenges for HR because clearly it's more of a challenge when you have people working in a variety of locations, because employment laws were not relaxed just because people were working from home. It was perhaps easier to manage policy when all the employees reported to a single location. You particularly non-exempt employees who may be paid on an hourly basis They come in at 8 o'clock, they leave at 5 o'clock, they work an 8-hour day. When they're working from home, that time is much more difficult to manage. Of course, there's computer tracking software and other means to track an employee's productivity when they're working remotely. But things such as, wage an hour, if a person is working overtime, at what point do they trip the wire and go into overtime if they're working from home? That's much more difficult to manage and supervise in a remote setting. Perhaps an employee becomes injured while working from home. Is that compensable under workers' compensation if the person is at home but technically working during the workday? Those are things that HR is having to face in the new remote environment. And I think we're taking, in our business, we've been able to adapt to it fairly well because we are HR professionals. We're made up of a company that does this for a living, but for many small business owners, if they were faced with that type of an issue, would not know how to handle it.
Yeah, and I think it's a big it's a great point that you make, that not everyone knows how to deal with it, and what they need to do is try to find somebody to help them with that. There are lots of solutions out there, to help if they are concerned about certain issues. I think some of the complexities that people haven't realized, if you have employees in different states, you may need different strategies on how you pay that payroll tax. If you have employees, let's say in certain states like California, you have to give them a remote work stipend to cover some of their expenses. I mean, there is complexity that is remote specific. That people they can't ignore it. They have to stay in front of it, and working with a good HR person, a good partner, a PEO, like you said, something like that can really help them steer clear of some of those issues that maybe they would have otherwise had.
Right. Well, you bring up the various states. There are 50 states and 50 different laws that you have to comply with. One of the advantages that remote work obviously has created is it's removed geographic boundaries from the recruiting process. And so if you are of a mindset that, hey, we need to hire a tax accountant and they need to work in this location, well, your pool of candidates may be somewhat limited if you're only looking in a particular geography. But if you open it up to the entire country, and it doesn't matter where the person is sitting and where they're doing the job, then it certainly creates a wider pool of candidates for recruiting. But at the same time, the more states you're in, the more complex your employment picture becomes, because you have state level regulations to deal with. And of course, in our state, in our case, we're in 48 states. So it keeps our legal department very busy, monitoring what's going on at the various state houses. We have one federal government, but we have 50 state houses, and that can be, quite challenging.
And thousands and thousands of counties, right? I mean, and cities. It's just crazy.
Yeah. And you've got exactly, and sometimes you have occupational taxes that if you don't know these things, and of course our legal department subscribe to a number of sources that keep them updated whenever there's a change, but being updated on that change is one thing, and executing on that is quite another. It does take some manpower and some time to do those things. But you're right. I wrote an article for Forbes a couple of months ago on the complexity of being an employer in the current environment, and of course mentioning all of the new rules associated with the CARES Act and with being COVID compliant and maintaining safety standards, and the questionnaire that has to be done on a daily basis to ensure that your employees are COVID negative before they come to the workplace. These are things that 3 years ago didn't exist, and now all of a sudden It's been thrust upon employers to become the compliance police to ensure that all that stuff happens. And then you have the litigation exposure associated with that, which I don't think we've seen that fully mature. I think that there's a new industry that's probably going to start up as a result of who's coming to work, who's not coming to work. Is this person been exposed at work, or was it at home? And all of these kind of things will eventually be litigated. And again, employers are going to have to be very mindful of the expense associated with those things.
Yeah, I mean, right now, certainly cases around the SCRA compliance is one of the biggest we see by the trial attorneys. I think COVID's going to take over, right? That's going to become the new wave of big money for those attorneys out there doing that kind of work. And certainly companies need to be prepared, right? They need to You can't just wait to do what you're supposed to do until you get sued, right?
I like to think that we can anticipate these things and be as proactive as we can. And that's, I guess, the challenge that we have is to craft policies that are as compliant as they can be with existing law, while at the same time giving an employer a defendable position in the event that there is a lawsuit of any kind. And I think that this is just as the early days of this. I don't know that we've really seen how bad this can potentially become and how much of a burden it can come to employers. I just don't know how to predict how that's going to play out.
Right. And is this the perfect moment for us to maybe begin to have those conversations with business owners to help them, I guess, focus on HR as an investment, right, into future profits, and not as just as an expense, category? Because doing these things like you're talking about could be hundreds of thousands of dollars and hundreds or thousands of hours of brain power put towards discovery and lawsuits, and right. So, is this an area of focus for you right now, helping business owners understand that difference?
I think it's part of the value proposition of what we offer our clients. Every day. We talk about, and again, I'm speaking from our industry. As a PEO, we have a team of subject matter experts in each of these areas of exposure where employers can potentially be hung out to dry. Certainly, we can't predict what might happen, but what we can do is put the type of HR infrastructure in place at our clients' locations to give them the best and most defendable positions. You're right about viewing your employees. You hear employees referred to as human capital. That term may sound a little insensitive or dehumanizing to some people, but when you view humans, your employees as human capital, you invest in capital. I mean, they're not assets on the balance sheet, but you think about the human capital being a collection of skills and knowledge and experience that collectively bringing together provide value to an organization. If you view it that way and invest in it in that way, and I'm not talking about just in higher salaries, but I'm talking about also in professional development. Some of the most cutting edge companies today have their own internal professional development programs. We do at Lyons HR. We also have a mentoring program where employees who are relatively new can be matched with someone with a little more experience that can mentor them and help them develop professionally, because we find that those are the things that really create a kind of positive, healthy culture that drives success within an organization. I've always said culture is the number one determinant of company profitability, because if your employees are happy, if they're happy, they will be more productive. If they're more productive, the company will be more profitable because you'll have loyal clients.
Well, I know certainly people should be interested in checking out your book, We Are HR. Are there any other books that you're reading these days or think that people should be checking out?
Well, I'm not reading a business book at the moment. I'm reading a book by Mark Levin called American Marxism, which is a little frightening. I'm also just finished a book by Bill O'Reilly called Killing the Mob, which I found fascinating. It's kind of an expose about the organized crime in this country and the impact that it had on industry, entertainment, and pretty much all of our walks of life. I think those are kind of fascinating books. Those are the kind of things I read on my personal time.
Yeah. Oh, that's why we like to ask the question. We always get interesting answers, but different things people are reading right now. So
yeah.
Last and most important question, how can people find out more about you, about Lyons HR? What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, our website is lyonshr.com. There is an abundance of information on our company as well as the industry that's available through our website. My personal website is billjlyons.com. And of course, both of those websites are connected to one another, so you can go to one and go to the other very easily. But all of our contact information is out there on the website.
Oh, fantastic. Bill, thank you so much for being a part of the show today. Learned a lot. Now, hopefully we can have you come back at some point and give us an update on all the great stuff that you're doing.
I'd love to do that. Thank you for having me, Chris.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Hopefully you've learned something you can use in your own career in a positive way. Until next time, go out there and make it an awesome day. Thanks, everyone.